Alright guys, so hopefully this document that I have pulled up looks really familiar. Hopefully you've seen it before. I want you to go ahead and open it up. Um, if It should already be in your Notability, but if you've never opened it, then you can find it in the ACT Practice Tests and Reflections folder, and it's attached to the 0909 assignment. So the first thing I want you to do is to look at your ACT English Test Passage 2, the score that you got on it, and you need to write down your realistic score, that's how many you got right, and the time limit here, and your extended time score here, which is how many you got right with all the time you needed. So these would be ones that you starred to indicate that you finished after time ran out, but it's just, for some people they start them but they didn't answer them, and you need to make sure that you answered them so I can give you the score that you're capable of getting with all the time you needed over here. So you should see something that says like 6 versus 6 or 11 versus 11 or whatever that tells you how many you got right in time limit versus how many you got right with all the time you needed. So fill that page out first for passage 2. That's page 1. The first test on the ACT is the English test. It's 45 minutes and there are 75 questions. We went over this last time, so this just tells you about how many questions there are for each category: punctuation, grammar and usage, sentence structure, strategy, organization, and style. So on the ACT English test, these are the answers and the types of questions. And what I want you to do is on page 2 of your reflection, I want you to write down the types of questions you got wrong. So I had already written them down for passage 1, and you just had to highlight which ones you got wrong. But for passage 2, you need to write out what types of questions. So if you got number 1 wrong, you would write redundant next to it, right? If you got number 6 wrong, you would write down, oh, whoops. Well, that's a mistake. Sorry. So this should say like 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, etc. all the way up to 30. Sorry about that. And so jot down what type of question you got wrong for passage 2, what types of questions, and we're tracking these. So pause this, do that real quick. Then what I want you to do is I want you to look at your score, your realistic score, and I want you to pretend that you got that on all 5 of the English passages. So you're going to take that first score and you're going to multiply by 5, and then you're going to take that number and you're going to convert it to the scaled score, which is out of 36 on the ACT. So if you got, let's say, 10 right, 10 times 5 is 50. So you would be looking at getting about a 21 on the ACT. All right, so I'm going to talk through the questions as quickly as I can, and I really want you to listen so that hopefully you can learn something, because one of the tricks to doing well on the ACT or to improving your score is to learn from your mistakes, okay? So you don't make them again. So number 16. Last week he told me he had to go on a business trip in connection with his work. Now, in connection with his work is redundant. It's like business trip implies that it's connected to his work, right? So it's just too wordy, it's too redundant. You're kind of like repeating yourself in different words. And G is the same, having something to do with his job that involved traveling to another city. I mean, that's kind of implied in a business trip. And so the correct answer is J. It's just to omit this underlined portion, to take it out. Omit means to take it out. So last week he told me he had to go on a business trip and that I'd be staying with his sister for 3 days. You want to be concise, okay? You don't need that extra bit, because it's just kind of repeating what you've already said. Question 17. Soon after I arrived, my aunt said she had a gift for me. Which of the following alternatives to the underlined portion would not be acceptable? So that makes sense. Let's substitute out not long after I arrived, my aunt said she had a gift for me. That seems the same. A short time after I arrived, my aunt said she had a gift for me. That seems fine. As soon after, okay. As soon after I arrived doesn't make sense, okay? That's incorrect grammar. Shortly after I arrived, my aunt said she had a gift for me. So the correct answer is C, which is kind of ironic because it's the only one that's not correct. But you have to be careful for things like this. You pick the wrong answer when it says not. All right, 18. Soon after I arrived, my aunt said she had a gift for me. Okay, so we don't want to put a comma in between a subject and a verb. Okay, so that one's not correct. We don't need a comma after the said here because we don't have a direct quote. Okay, so if you said, my aunt said, like, comma, speech marks, it belonged to my mother, your grandma, then that would be fine. But if you are just repeating what someone else said, then you don't put it in speech marks, and therefore you don't need a comma after said. So that one's not right. And then I can't really tell if that's a colon or a semicolon. Either way, the colon wouldn't work because you need a complete sentence before a colon. Soon after I arrived, my aunt said, that's not a complete sentence. And it couldn't be a semicolon because the same thing, you need a complete sentence on both sides and you don't have a complete sentence before it. So the answer is just F, no change. 19. I was expecting my aunt to hand me a ring or a bracelet or maybe an old book, but instead she led me outside. So the writer is considering deleting the first part of the preceding sentence. So preceding means the sentence before this box, so that the sentence would read, she led me outside. If the writer were to make this change, the essay would primarily lose. It's not this one, details that indicate to the reader what will eventually happen, because it's about her expectations. So B, the contrast between the gift and what the narrator had anticipated receiving. So she had anticipated receiving a ring or a bracelet or maybe an old book. And then, but instead, that shows the contrast of what she got instead, which is going to be a turtle, like not what she was expecting at all. There's no indication that the narrator normally receives rings, bracelets, and books. There's just no evidence that she normally gets those things. And then an indication of how close the narrator and her aunt are, no. I mean, her aunt is just passing down an heirloom to her, but it's not about like having a close relationship. All right, number 20. Rosie must have heard us talking because she began to amble over to us. So then we're just figuring out which one is grammatically correct. Rosie must have heard of us talking. Well, no, she didn't hear of them talking. It wasn't like rumor has it, right? She actually heard them talking, and that's why she walked over. Rosie must have heard about, or Rosie must have heard. So must have, right here, must of. Okay, that's incorrect grammar. Don't say must have, don't write must have. It's a mishearing on people's part. It's actually must have or must have, like as far as MUST apostrophe VE. Like if you were to make this a contraction, you could drop the H and the A and put an apostrophe here and connect it to must. So this is a mishearing, and grammatically it's not correct. So the correct answer is F, no change. 21, which of the following alternatives to the underlined portion would not be acceptable? So it says, as soon as my aunt assured me that Rosie wouldn't snap or bite, I reached down to stroke her neck. So it sounds like she didn't reach down immediately because she needed that reassurance first. So after my aunt assured me that Rosie wouldn't snap or bite, I reached down to stroke her neck. That makes sense. When my aunt assured me that Rosie wouldn't snap or bite, I reached down to stroke her neck. That makes sense. My aunt assured me that Rosie wouldn't snap or bite, I reached down to stroke her neck. I'll come back to that one. Once my aunt assured me that Rosie wouldn't snap or bite, I reached down to stroke her neck. Okay, so C is the one that's wrong, and it's wrong primarily because that would end up being comma splicing. Because my aunt assured me that Rosie wouldn't snap or bite is a complete sentence, and I reached down to stroke her neck is a complete sentence, and you cannot put a comma in between two complete sentences unless you have a fanboy right here. But the other reason why it's not really correct is the fact that we need the reason why she reached down was after that reassurance. And so like as soon as her aunt told her, when her aunt told her, after her aunt told her, once her aunt told her, that's when she decided to do it. 22. Upon reviewing this paragraph and realizing that some information has been left out, the writer composes the following sentence. This is Rosie, she announced. This sentence should most logically be placed after sentence. Okay, so then we need to figure out when the aunt should say this is Rosie. So let's read it in all the places. That shouldn't be there, sorry. So she pointed to a corner of the yard where a tortoise was calmly munching a dandelion. This is Rosie. Rosie must have heard us talking because she began to amble over to us. Okay, so I'm not even going to read it in between everyone, although I would if I was actually doing it on the ACT. But clearly to me, this has to go right here. Because we don't want to say Rosie must have heard us talking, because who's Rosie, right? Like, we have no idea. Is Rosie a girl? Is Rosie an old lady? Like, no, Rosie's a tortoise. So she pointed to a corner of the yard where a tortoise was calmly munching a dandelion, and then we have to have that introduction of this tortoise is Rosie. Okay? Otherwise, the rest of it doesn't make sense. So it has to be placed after sentence 1 so that for the rest of the paragraph we know who Rosie is, that Rosie is a tortoise. 23, Rosie, it turns out, is a desert tortoise that my grandmother had started raising over 20 years ago. So this is an interruption with paired commas, which is what we were looking at with the Devil and Tom Walker. So we need, see, here's your subject, here's your verb. You could take this out. Rosie is a desert tortoise. So Rosie, comma, it turns out, comma, is a desert tortoise. That's an interruption, so we need paired commas around it. We definitely do not want a colon because you can't put a colon in the middle of a complete sentence. Or, sorry, you can't put it in the middle of a sentence. Rosie, it turns out, is a fragment. It's not a complete sentence, so you could not put a colon there. All right, which of the 24? Which of the following alternatives to the underlined portion would not be acceptable? We're picking the wrong answer. So Rosie, it turns out, is a desert tortoise that my grandmother had started raising over 20 years ago. All right, so I'm going to start here. That my grandmother had begun to raise over 20 years ago. Sounds right. That my grandmother had started to raise over 20 years ago. Sounds right. That my grandmother had started up raising. Okay, no, we're not starting something up, right? Like a lawnmower. That one's not right. That my grandmother had begun raising over 20 years ago. That sounds right too. So the wrong answer is H. That's the one you pick. 25. My aunt said that she would have checked with my parents, who each agreed that if I wanted to take responsibility for Rosie, I could take her home with me. So this one's about tense, okay? My aunt said that she would have checked with my parents, suggests she didn't, right? And we know she did because they agreed that if she would take responsibility for Rosie, that she could take her home, the narrator could take her home. So that one's not correct. My aunt said that she had checked with my parents, who agreed. Yes, it's past tense. She had checked with them. This is what they said. That she would check. No, it's not future tense. She already did it. See, past tense here. She's already checked. They've already agreed. And she must check. That's future tense. Sorry, would check. My aunt said that she would check. Yeah, that must check. Same thing. She already did it. It needs to be in past tense. See, yeah. All right, 26. Given that all the choices are true, which one most effectively introduces the information that follows in this paragraph? So I'm actually going to save 26 for last, okay? 27, and here's why. I need to read the whole paragraph first. I might as well read the whole paragraph while I'm answering the other questions. So 27 says, they can experience the satisfaction of contentment through a diet of grass clippings, lettuce, broccoli, melons, and other vegetables and fruit. Okay, so they can reap their necessary nutritional requirements from a diet of grass clippings, lettuce, broccoli, melons, and other vegetables and fruit. They can be kept as happy as a clam with a diet of grass clippings, lettuce, etc. They can be adequately nourished by a diet of grass clippings. Okay, they all make sense. So which one's the best? The best one is what you can say in the least amount of words, okay? Be concise. They can be adequately nourished by a diet of grass clippings, lettuce, broccoli, melons, and other vegetables and fruits. Like, although it sounds nice and everything, reap their necessary nutritional requirements and experience the satisfaction of contentment through, it's not necessary. And this is just actually clearer, and like I said, more concise. And like cute, you're trying to, have a cute little simile, but no. 28. Which choice provides the most specific and precise information? So they're looking for being specific, they're looking for being precise. and other vegetables and fruit versus and other things they could eat. That things, that's not specific. That's like the opposite of specific. And other edible items. Well, edible items, vegetables and fruit, that's more specific. Like what type of edible items? Vegetables and fruit. And other fresh foods, same thing. Vegetables and fruit is more specific. What kind of fresh foods? Vegetables and fruit, not like milk and meat, right? Okay, so let's go back to, well, maybe we need to do one more. 29. I learned that I should build plywood enclosures in each of my parents' backyards so that Rosie would be safe year-round. So she has 2 parents. Okay, so this needs to stay plural. There's more than one parent, and so you need the S on the end to make parent, plural, parents. And then each of them has their own backyard. Okay, they're probably divorced. Okay, so we've got 2 backyards that belong to each of the parents. So this has to be plural. So this one's wrong because it turns singular. And these 2 are wrong because they're not possessive. It doesn't say that the backyards belong to the parents, which they do. So the correct answer is A, no change. Okay, let's go back now that we've read the whole paragraph. So given that all the choices are true, which of the following effectively introduces the information that follows? So it's interesting that Rosie is older than I am. Well, no, because we know what they eat and about temperature and about shelter, okay? So it's not about age. The paragraph isn't about age. Most tortoise species are now found only in Africa. No, none of these are relevant. Some giant tortoises weigh as much as 180 kilograms. That's not relevant either. That's not what this paragraph's about. The answer is G. I asked my aunt about Rosie's needs and cared. So, like, what sort of shelter does she need? What sort of food does she need? 30. I learned that tortoises are among the most endangered families in reptiles. So this is looking for 2 things. It's looking to see if you know if it should be families or family. It's if you can identify if it needs to be singular, family, or if it needs to be plural, families. And it says I learned that tortoises are among the most endangered families. There's more than one family that's endangered, okay, because it's among the most endangered, which implies there's more than one. So H and J are definitely wrong. And then you have to decide, is the correct preposition in or is the correct preposition of, okay? And of is when you have like a part of a whole. So the most endangered families, that's a part of reptiles. Reptiles is the whole, and out of the reptiles, the most endangered families is a part of it. So I learned that tortoises are among the most endangered families in reptiles is not grammatically correct because it should be of reptiles. I learned that tortoises are among the most endangered families of reptiles. So that's just to catch if you know which preposition to use. All right, make sure that you have completed page 1 of the ACT reflection and that with your scores, and you've completed page 2 with the types of questions. Write down the types of questions that you got wrong. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I hope that you found the explanations helpful and that you learned something.